Hi, and welcome to the Phil Cooke Podcast. Today we have a special guest, Mark MacDonald. He's been on before. Church media. He is a church communications expert. His company is Be Known for Something. And I'm going to ask him about that because I get a lot of people asking me, well, what does that mean? Why would you name your company that? And it's quite interesting. So if you have any questions about media for churches, ministries, nonprofits, we're going to be talking about how to get your message out there today, what works, what doesn't. And I'm going to ask him some questions based on some things he said. So I think you're going to have a really good time. So let's go right to the interview with Mark MacDonald. Mark, welcome to the podcast again. I've had you back. You were so terrific the first time, and we've had so many requests to bring you back. I thought, hey, let's have him back and see what he has to say, because this church communication thing is just a big deal. And there's a lot of my viewers and listeners that have a lot of questions about this. And you've been at it for a long time, right?
Yeah, we're hitting our 25th year here with Be Known for Something.
All right, let's start there. Be Known for Something, the company name. That's the single biggest question I get from people is, what does he mean by that? What is that all about? And what does it have to do with the church? Pontificate. Let me just give you the mic. Go with it.
There's a short answer and then there's a longer answer. I'm going to try to do a medium-sized answer. We started 25 years ago in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. And I remember brainstorming, what am I going to call this thing? And I remember thinking, okay, so I don't want to put my name in it. I don't think I want to put my name in it. We ended up doing Pinpoint Creative Group. And Pinpoint Creative Group, we were always talking about threads and brand positioning. So we brainstormed it and we came up with this tagline, Be Known for Something. And it kind of stuck because what it does is it really emphasizes the fact of, the state of being actually means that it's all the way through. It's not just something you put on the outside, like you are this. And then being known for something, in order to be known for something, you have to actually concentrate on a message and do it enough times so that people actually remember it. And then since we dealt with the church so much, the worldwide perception study of what church is, most people think about what we're against, not what we're for. So the idea of being known for something is very critical for the church, because if people don't know what we're for, they'll think of what we're against. And then the something, that one thing, that's hard to tell the church. That's hard to tell anybody. If you're only going to be known for one thing, what will it be? And oftentimes, like when I'm talking with people, personally, it all came from, wow, this is going to make this a little bit longer story, but
It's all right.
So I was known as a singer growing up. I was part of the MacDonald trio, my brother, sister, and I. And then when I graduated and got married.
Okay. In a future episode, you got to bring photos of that. I want to see the MacDonald trio.
Yeah, I've seen some of those album covers that you post, and it's all scary. But when I graduated and started working for one of Eastern Canada's largest ad agencies, we were next door to a funeral home, and the funeral home found out that I sang. So they said, oftentimes we have families that don't know anybody who can sing, but they oftentimes request male singers. Would you be one of our singers that we use? And I ended up being the funeral singer for our little town, much like the wedding singer, except, well, no, it's actually a lot alike.
I think we've come up with a title for your biography, the funeral singer. This is awesome.
Cool. Yes. But the crazy part is that I participated in a lot of funerals. And when somebody gets up, they oftentimes say, we're here because so-and-so has lived a good long life. And then I always listen for what is it that they bring up as the thing that they're known for. And that's what we as a church today have to figure out. What do we want to be known for in our community? And that something can't be many things, or else people won't remember any of it. So to bring the story around full circle is that more people remembered Be Known for Something than Pinpoint Creative Group. And so after a few years, we just said, let's just ditch Pinpoint Creative Group and let's just be called Be Known for Something.
That works. I like it. In fact, as you're talking, I'm sitting here thinking, this is a word for leaders. This is a word for anybody that, I was reading the Wall Street Journal the other day, and they were talking about a new executive taking over a company. And whenever they do that, they always say Bob Johnson, known as a turnaround expert, or known as a financial wizard, or known as a breakthrough creative guy. It's always, they always talk about what this guy or this woman is known for. And so I would ask leaders listening and watching right now, think about what is it that people say about you. In my presentation on branding, I talk about what do people think of when they think of you. And that's so critically important these days because, one British study I saw says the typical person sees 10,000 media messages a day. And that was a number of years ago. And it's probably much higher now. And in that world, if you're not known for something, you're going to be forgotten pretty much. And so whether it's a church or a ministry or a nonprofit or a person, I think it's a great question.
Well, and it's one of those things that shouldn't be left up to them to decide. And that's really what branding is all about. Branding is actually determining ahead of time what you want to be known for, so that you're needed in an audience, or that you actually matter. And oftentimes we're known for things that don't matter. And if you're known for things that don't matter, you just turn into noise, and people ignore noise.
Now, so in that definition, branding is not what you say it is. It's what they say it is, what they say about you, not what you say about you or your church, right?
Well, and you just flip that around. And what I believe is that if you want them to say it about you, you need to actually help them with that language.
Yes.
And oftentimes, I know with our process of figuring out what church branding is for individual local churches, oftentimes we start with talking. We do listening groups, these focus groups with groups of 8 to 10 people. We get them all into a circle. Nobody's there from the church leadership. The church trusts me enough to just allow myself to just start asking some questions. And what we do is we record all of those sessions. We don't let the church hear those sessions. And we make sure that everyone knows, you're an anonymous person in this group, but we really do care about, why do you like this church? What caused you to come to this church? What's keeping you in this church? And what we do now is, thanks to AI, we allow an AI to listen to all of the tapes of these listening groups. And we ask AI, what are some of the key words that they use in describing this church? And then if the church can figure out, okay, so based upon what they believe, here are the words that they're using. And then the church can start using those. And that's what we call the thread.
Now, you're looking for something that makes your church unique and different in this process, right? If everybody said this church is known for preaching the gospel, I could name you a million churches known for preaching the gospel out there. Maybe I don't want to put you on the spot because you don't have the information in front of you, but in your experience, what are some of the things churches say they're known for, or you've discovered that churches are known for? Give me some examples of what we're talking about here.
Now, I think that we could probably, if we tell everyone not to listen for a second, and we could just kind of discuss this.
And you don't have to mention church names, just
no
generally.
Church name.
Yeah.
But how many times does a church say to you, we're a different church? And it's like, seriously, how are you different?
Yeah.
And then they're like, well, we have 3 services on Sunday morning. And it's like, yeah, there's a lot of churches that have 3 services. And what I always point out is, okay, if you have a praise team or a choir or a parking lot and you do hymn books or you do music on the wall. Like, no matter how people actually describe their church, it's pretty much the same as all the other churches. And as soon as you have sameness, somebody has to differentiate themselves so that you stand out. And that's where Google today, I mean, we just, you know, it's like whatever community that you live in, if you only had one church, wouldn't it be so easy for you to be known for something that someone would actually think matters? But the problem is that we have hundreds of churches. You know, I'm in Jacksonville, Florida now, and we have 200 Baptist churches here in Jacksonville, Florida. So if someone says, well, you know, I should probably go to church and I was raised Baptist, you still have 200 to choose from. So if you think, what if they were all lined up on the same street? How would you choose? And like oftentimes people, if you were standing across the street and it's like, okay, well, there's the 200 churches, most people would go to the one that's closest to them. And that's what usually happens. Proximity is really, really important. But then you look at the church and you think, okay, well, do they all have steeples? Yeah. Do they all have a front door? Yeah. And most pastors push back and say, yeah, but fortunately we're not all on one street, but we're all on Google Street.
Yeah.
And Google somehow has, risen to the top so that if you're going to look for a church, well, you should ask Google because Google's a great church recommender. Not really, but yet we could get to control what message gets put out onto Google. And in that short metadata description, which is just, those few characters that pop up with your search, when your search results come back,
right?
In that paragraph, you need to say what makes you different, and like drop all of the stupid. Oh, did I say stupid?
No.
The religious cliches, like better together, or you
belong here.
You belong here, or kid friendly. Is like, yes, all churches are kid friendly. All churches want to have that young family to come to their church. So what you end up doing, if you use the same language, then you end up just making the decision more difficult when someone tries to choose you. So we say, come up with that 3 to 5 words, that really simple thread that your church does exceptionally well, and that it corresponds with a need or a concern in the audience. And if you can become a solution to a need or concern in the audience, you will matter to that group of people if they're looking for church.
That's great. I love that. I love it. And people push back a lot in saying, well, we just need to be known for preaching the gospel. But, that great. So is everybody else. And so I think you're exactly right. Exactly right. And by the way, let me say this. You mentioned Google. We do live in a generation where people want to check you out online before they visit, and whether they use Google or whatever, they want to check you out. So my question is, why is your church website so lame? If your church website is the tool that makes people decide and tip over whether or not they're going to actually show up, man, in many ways, that ought to be the best thing you do. And so that just that's totally off the subject, but I think it's to think about.
It's like, imagine if everyone chose your church based upon what it looks like. Well, then you would lean into what it looks like. Make sure that the outside is painted, make sure that the landscaping is done properly. And yet more people will look at Google of what you look like online, and churches don't lean into that and invest the right amount of money into making sure that the message is correct. And for us, that has to start with the brand. That has to start with that thread, that concept that positions you different from all the other churches. And if you have that thread, then the next tumble down effect is what keywords would people be looking for if they were looking for that solution? And those keywords have to be contained in the metadata, but also on the homepage. It has to be the first paragraph of your website pages is really critical because no one's reading the whole page, but they're looking at that first paragraph. The main headline, the H1 on a page, like your keywords have to be there. And those keywords have to lead to what makes you different rather than what makes you the same.
So I spoke at a conference, a pastor's conference, not really a conference. It was kind of a seminar training thing with about 50 pastors from a small denomination in the Northeast about a month ago. And this is something they had never heard of. I mean, it was as far from them. And most of these guys were pastoring 50, 75. The biggest would be maybe 100 people in their church. And if you're small like that, does it still matter? How do you, if you don't have resources, you don't have a big worship team, you don't have parking lot guys and, a lot of stuff that big churches have. When you're little, how does this impact you when you're a small church?
Well, I think it almost is worse, or I don't even know what word to use there. I think that it matters even more for a smaller church. And I mean, the MacDonald trio, my brother and sister and I, we used to sing at these little one-room churches that, and it was in Canada. So like just before the service started, someone would come up and put a log in the fire just to give us that, the heat from the potbelly stove in the back. So I understand small churches. Yep. And what I have learned is that in those communities, and they're usually smaller communities, but even in the larger communities with smaller churches, they know who you are or they don't care. And so if they don't care, then you need to lean into what does matter to them and try to do something for them. They probably won't come into the church, so the church needs to go out in the community and make its presence known in the community. But for those churches, those small churches, oftentimes the reason why they are small is because the perception of that church probably isn't all that great in the community. And so even more so, you need to make sure that you understand what should we be known for? And then how much do we have to pivot from one to the next? And Phil, that sometimes it's easier to start from scratch than to fix what's broken.
Yeah.
And you just mentioned that to a small church and they all bristle at it. It's like, no, our church has existed for generations and generations. Yep. My great grandfather donated the pews or hand hewn them or whatever it is. And the problem is that the church that starts from scratch oftentimes just takes over. And that's why non-denominational churches, the big steel building churches, can move into a community and really become known for something totally different, something that really matters to the community. Where those smaller churches, it's like, why would we ever go there?
That's good. Well, and I would say, if you're the pastor or leader of a small church, I like turning negatives into positives. For instance, I'll have someone tell me, I'm in a small rural church. 95% of our members are retired or, they're older people. I'd love to bring in new people and they spend all their time trying to bring in young people. But hey, let's start with the old folks. A, they've got more money anyway, so let's start with them. And B, they need the services of a great local church. So let's just be an amazing church for an older crowd, or let's be an amazing church for whatever crowd you happen to have. You may be in a difficult urban area. Turn that negative into a positive. Run with it. And I think I've seen churches do that with some amazing results. So.
Well, and it's interesting. I'm working with a church in Texas right now, and it's a smaller church, and they have aged up. When we did a demographic study of the inside of the church, most people were over 70 years old, And when we looked at their community, we realized that the average age of the community was about 36 or 35, someplace in there. And so the church just said to me, like, is there any hope for us? And I said, okay, so what are the other churches doing in town? And what we found was that there were some of those big, independent style, huge churches.
Yep.
That oftentimes don't have a lot of programs for the seniors. And what they heard all the time was, I tried that church, music was too loud, blah, 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 and all that stuff.
Yep.
And we just didn't feel like we fit in there. And it's like, well, why not create a church where they do fit in? And what they did was they made the declaration that, okay, all those big churches are forgetting the seniors. We're going to become all about the seniors. And that church almost instantly started to grow, just as more and more things, because seniors like to do different things than the small young family is.
That's great. I love that idea. Run with whatever you've got or wherever you've got, and run with it and make the best you possibly can. And I just think, and by the way, another pet peeve of mine along that line is churches don't. It's interesting. Churches have programs for everybody: kids, adults, seniors, women, divorcees, alcoholics, whatever. Which is great. They have programs for everybody except business leaders. When was the last time you went to a church that had a really focused ministry on raising up business leaders? Most pastors look at business leaders in their church as ATMs. They just call them when they need some money. But the truth is, if you could raise up a ministry of business leaders at your church and become known for that, I'm telling you that a lot of people would gravitate towards that, because so many business leaders I know have told me, I go to my church, they don't talk about business. They don't care about us. They're not concerned about what I do for a living. They minister to my wife. They minister to my kids. They minister to my parents, which is great. But he said, as far as the challenges business leaders face out there as Christians, they don't even address those ever. And I'll tell you, you could start an amazing church if you became known for reaching out to people like that, because nobody's doing it. Nobody's doing it. So I just do that. No extra charge for that, by the way.
I just started thinking, okay, the next time that you have me on, let's just do pet peeves, because
no, that would go for hours.
Yes. And it's so crazy, and I don't know, I hear it all the time from business leaders. Why doesn't the church care about what I do? They just care about what I make. Yeah. And the problem is that I think that the church is very scared that they become too businessy. And I think that, like, even just in our listening groups, and like a lot of things get exposed in listening groups at churches, the one thing that I hear oftentimes is, we needed to get a roofer for our house, but it would have been nice if I knew that there was a roofer in our church. And the only way that they can oftentimes find out, who does that in the church, they have to call the church or the church office. And then the church office oftentimes says, you know what, we don't really have a listing like that.
Yeah.
And I think that it is a missed opportunity. I think that especially, today, a lot of us are known for what we do for a living. But when we step into the church, we don't want to push what we do, because then it looks like we're using the church as a platform to sell our services. So the problem is that we oftentimes, don't give the opportunities that we should be giving for members who do certain things, and do it so that they can give more to the church.
That's great. All right, now let's shift for a little bit. And my global research team has done some investigation, come up with some statements that you've made that I want you to respond to and explain what you mean, because they're really interesting to me. They're quite interesting. No expose here, by the way. But some things that you said that are kind of interesting, and I want you to explain. Number one is, the church doesn't have a marketing problem. It has a clarity problem. What do you mean by that?
Oh, there's so much that you can unpack with this, mainly because the church oftentimes, when you just mention marketing out loud, instantly they bristle at it, thinking that it's just a business term. But a marketing term, marketing wise, the church doesn't have a marketing problem, in the sense that oftentimes we think, okay, well, we need more ads or
Right.
more posts or more bulletin inserts or like, or even just standing on a platform and just being able to say, every pastor thinks, yeah, if I only had more time, they would get it more. And it's probably not the case. But most churches don't need more ads or posts or platforms. They need fewer words and a clearer why. Why do we exist? And the problem is that when people don't understand you, they don't engage with you. And that's the problem today. It's not that we need more. And, Phil, I'm sure you follow some of these Facebook groups that, if only we could just figure out how to put that QR code on the back of the pew so that it stays, we'll have more people give.
Yes.
And it's like all of those things, all those marketing things. I don't think that that's the problem in the church. I think that the problem is that most people don't know why they exist and why they should be giving.
I like it. And I think that also goes for simple clarity in every message you do. Very often we try to be everything to everybody. And it always goes back to be known for something. What is that thing? And by the way, let me just throw this in there. I think the greatest marketing tool ever in the history of the church is word of mouth. In every avenue of advertising, that's what companies covet. They want to achieve great word of mouth about their product or about their institution or whatever. And I just wonder how many churches have members that are so excited about their church, so plugged in, so engaged that they talk about it all the time. And I just don't think many churches are doing anything that makes their congregation want to talk about it. Mm-hmm. And boy, if you could have, even if you had 50 people in your church, if you had them talking to the guy at the grocery store, their barber, their hairstylist, their doctor, people out, their neighbors about your church, wow, what a shot in the arm that would be. So, I go back to asking, are you doing something that makes people talk?
And oftentimes in our listening groups, after we ask a lot of open-ended questions, we finally end with, so what do you think this church is known for? And what we've found is that the room goes very quiet. That usually means they have no sweet clue. It's like, it's not clear in their minds what their church is all about. If the people who go to your church don't have that clarity, there's a big problem. And it's exactly what you say, Phil. They're not going to be able to speak to somebody else why they need to come to the church. And unclear churches don't get attended.
That's good. All right. Next question. This leads right to our next statement that you've made. If your church disappeared tomorrow, would your community notice? Great statement. Explain that.
Yeah. And oftentimes we think, Little House on the Prairie days, the church, was such a pivotal, part of the community. All these people would, come together and they would build a house next to another house. And it's like, wow, you feel like me. Come on, we're going to build this community. After they were building during the time while they were building the community, all of a sudden someone would say, we need a church, and gone are those days.
Yeah.
And so a church just doesn't come up in most people's minds. And I guess what it really comes down to is, existence doesn't equal significance. Oftentimes,
say that again now slowly.
Existence doesn't equal significance.
Yeah.
So just because your church is in a community doesn't mean that everyone thinks it matters to the community. And so oftentimes people will drive by that empty building and think, what used to be in there? And no one knows when that church disappears. So this isn't really about attendance in a church. It's about the impact of the church. How do you emphasize the impact of the church? How do you make your community feel like that it needs these churches? And that's the problem, is that most people are not as church centric or thinking
Yeah.
about the church as much as what the church does. And so he really comes down to the fact that if you disappeared, would your town miss you or just replace you? And that's where, you need to create a brand that is really needed, that really matters to that group of people. And it really comes down to service. It's like,
Yeah.
how do you end up serving people and not just gathering?
Yeah.
And if you can do that, that's where the impact of the gospel can happen through a church.
That's great. And by the way, back to your business thing. I, I'm friends with a pastor who he was pastoring a pretty large church and was just curious about what my people do for a living, what my congregation does for a living. So he actually did a survey, and he discovered to his shock that there were 17 dentists in his church.
Whoa.
And so he got them all together one night and said, guys, what can we do here? And they started what's now become the largest free dental clinic in their entire state. And once a month, they dedicate a weekend to bringing these guys out, and they do hardcore stuff. They do tooth implants, all kind of stuff, and they bring in homeless people who, drugs ravage your teeth and your dental health. And but as a result of this blowing up like it has, they've gotten in national news. They've gotten on national television. They've been featured in their state in newspapers all over the place. And so it's just a great example of something you would never think of. Just asking my congregation what they do for a living could launch this huge ministry that's had an impact on thousands and thousands of people and made that church known nationwide. So that's pastors. I hope you're writing some of this stuff down, because this is good. This is
Well,
good
and
stuff.
the thing is that, what the pushback, oftentimes my pet peeve that I hear from the church is, yeah, but that seems soft. Like, how could we be known for, doing dentistry? Like, we're about the gospel. Like, we need to be, the power of, Jesus that can save, and, all of that stuff. The problem is that your community today, there's very few people who are waking up and looking in the mirror, just thinking, oh my goodness, if only I had Jesus.
Yes.
It's just
Yeah.
not happening. Instead, they are wanting something. Like, I need to change something. I need to raise my kids better. I need to figure out why do I matter? And so if you can take those more temporal things and convert them so that they connect, it's a thread. So your church becomes known for those things. But then when you start coming to the church, you quickly realize that it's the only way you can truly solve these things is through the power of the gospel.
That's great. And by the way, my position is always, for the critics out there, guys like you and I, our job is to get people in the door. I mean, they're never going to have their life transformed by Jesus unless we can get them in the door, or get them watching the live stream, or get them engaging in some capacity. So I'm hoping, pastors out there are already preaching the gospel, so that when they do walk in the door, they're going to have a powerful encounter with Jesus. That's the ultimate goal. But like this dental clinic, maybe people, hear about that and think, wow, that church really cares about people. And maybe I need to visit. Anything like that gets them to at least engage, walk in, I think is so critical. And we need to think more about that. You're exactly right. We think about preaching the gospel, which is great, but that's kind of an endpoint. We got to get them there first, or get that message in front of them in some capacity. So whether it's live streaming, live events.
It goes back to that perception. If most people, if they don't clearly know who you are, that clarity issue, if they don't clearly know, then they quickly go back to the perception of what church is, and that's what we're against. There's not a lot of people in the community that go, we need to go more to church so that we can we can join that hate group. They're against everything.
Yeah.
And that's why we have to become known for something, so that they go, you know what, that's the reason why I'm coming. It's, for my family, or for, to help me personally, or like, what are the needs, concerns, and goals in a community, so that our church can become a solution to those needs and concerns, or a path to a goal.
Now, Mark, to do this well, do you have to compromise your doctrine or your faith or your preaching, anything, just to get the record straight?
To get the record straight, I believe in God's word, and that it is truth, and that we should not add to it or take away from it or change it in any way. But most people will not be interested in God's word until they know how it impacts them in their lives.
That's a great statement. Okay, last question here. Let's land this plane.
Okay.
You have said that the biggest problem churches have is honesty. Churches have an honesty problem. What do you mean by that?
Oh my goodness. Okay, I feel like I'm going to get into trouble here.
We might as well end on trouble. Why not?
Yeah, exactly. So you could probably help me with this a little bit.
Okay.
But oftentimes churches say what sounds spiritual instead of what is actually true.
Yeah.
And the crazy part of it all is that people can smell it from a mile away, and yet they still will get up on stage and say it. And the majority of people in their congregation are just shaking their heads thinking, yeah, I wish that was true, but that's not what's true here.
Yeah.
And so, the clarity of knowing the truth and presenting the truth in such a way so that people will accept the truth, that clarity starts with courage. And if a church doesn't want to take the courage to actually understand and know what their church's perception is, they'll never move from that perception.
That's good. Now, it's worth noting that, the younger generations today are the most marketed, advertised, sold to generation in history. So you're exactly right. They can smell a con a mile away. This is a very sophisticated generation. So my big campaign is hype. Churches engage in so much hype. I saw a conference advertised the other day, a Christian conference called the Change the Nations Conference. And I seriously doubt that at the end of that conference, it was Shake the Nations Conference. Oh, nice. So I doubt at the end of that conference, any nations were shook. But it's another example of just how much hype we engage in, and people can smell it a mile away. They know. And so I think you're right. If let's just be good at something and just talk about that we don't have to hype it. We don't have to over promote it. I just, be who you are. Maybe that's the answer.
And what's crazy is that I'm going to say a statement and I think you're going to go, well, that's true. But it's like, then why aren't we practicing it? But people trust honesty more than polish. And
yes.
And like, we know that through social media. Most people will say, well, I can't do a video. I don't have all the production skills. I don't have all of the lighting and everything. And now we understand that more people will believe a video if it doesn't have that production polish. And so we need to lean into the real things and make things feel authentic and make things really like that it's not so perfect that no one would want to be part of it.
Yeah. Yeah, it doesn't have to be bad. It just has to feel real.
Yeah, that's the tension, isn't it? I mean, you do such amazing work, and you also, from your background and the amount of movies and videos and everything that you create. I'm not saying to throw all that stuff away.
Right.
I'm just saying make sure that it communicates as authentically as possible with the style that people will accept the most. And for the most part, for a lot of the things that we're doing, I mean, people will trust you more if you look more authentic.
Yeah. It's funny. I walked into a ministry the other day, and I walked into their office, and the ministry's been around since the early 60s. And I walked in the office and I felt like I had been teleported to the 60s. I mean, their office design, the things on the wall, just everything about their office, their studio. There was a little media ministry, their studios, everything about it was just out of date and old. And I thought, once I started listening to their programming, I realized it's the same. It's just like you're listening to a program I heard in the 60s or the 70s. And so I just think it's not a matter of being hip or being contemporary just for contemporary's sake. It's about, hey, the Bible says God's word never changes, but everything else does. People change, trends change, styles change. And if we're not changing with it, we're not speaking the language of the culture, and they're not going to be remotely interested in anything we have to say. And again, it's not about compromise. We're not compromising anything.
No.
We're just speaking the truth in a way people will understand it today, not in 1960. So I think maybe there's something there.
Absolutely. And I think that we all feel more comfortable in a room that feels like ourselves. And I think that we all understand how messy ourselves are. And we want a better way. We're not looking for a better sermon. We just want a better solution.
Yep.
And if the church can present, okay, we are a church of messy people, and here's what God's word has so that we can actually help better ourselves, we'll accept that message a lot faster if it starts with authenticity.
Yeah. And so I would close by just saying, try new things, but be who you are. I know if you're a small church, you're not going to do, what the big church down the street is doing. You're not going to have the worship team, the lighting. You're not going to, I went to a small church Christmas service one time, and they tried a smoke machine, and it was terrible. They obviously didn't know how to run it, and they were over pumping it. And, the guys singing on stage started coughing and getting lost because they couldn't see. It was just a nightmare. And I just thought, you know what? Be who you are. If you're a small church, just be amazing at it. If you're a big church, be amazing at it. Whatever size, shape, focus you are, be amazing at it. And don't try to be somebody, something you're not. And that goes to, I think, leaders personally as well. Would you say?
Which really comes full circle. I mean, you need to be known for something.
Yeah.
And if everyone else is doing haze, that doesn't mean that you need to do haze.
That's true.
And instantly, oftentimes the church always says, oh yeah, we're different. But the problem is that they all want to try to be the same. And the churches that are truly doing things different, they'll find an audience, and you just have to make sure that your difference is something that is needed in the audience.
Brilliant. Mark MacDonald, how do we get in touch with you? What are you famous for? Talk to us.
I guess I'm famous for being a funeral singer, but other than that, just go to beknownforsomething.com and you can find everything that you need to know about me and our process, as well as, most social media channels. I'm on there as Mark Mac 1023 or Be Known for Something.
And you have a remarkable team, and you're traveling everywhere, working with churches all over the country, out of the country too, probably, huh?
I am. Being Canadian, I get to work in Canada a little bit, and then not as much international as what you're doing. But I just almost need to just kind of point out the best book in the world on branding, though.
That's an archaeological classic right there. I don't know. People found that in the ruins of ancient Rome.
I found it, and it was even signed inside. So that's how much I follow you, and everyone should be following you.
I was invited. It's funny. I was invited to speak in the UK a few weeks ago, and doing some teaching and training there in the UK. And I had never known these people. I know who these people were. It was a church group. And I said, how did you find out about me? And they said, we actually found your book in a thrift store, a secondhand store. And he said, I bought it. I was intrigued by it. I started reading it, and I thought, wow, I need to know more about this. And he started looking me up. And so that was the first time I've ever been invited to speak at a place because they found my book at a secondhand shop. So the Lord seems fit to keep me in my lane, which is a really good thing. Keep my ego in check. So
the Lord works in mysterious ways.
Well, thank you for being on. Start thinking about topics for visit number 3, because we'll definitely do it. And I'm just going to tell people, go check out Mark, check out his team, check out their resources and the things they can do. It's really quite amazing, and it will transform your church, which I think is so important because I believe our future is the church. So let's try to make it as amazing as possible. Mark's pretty amazing. And, it's interesting that talking about being known for something, if you ever want to adapt that to your personal life, you need to get my book, One Big Thing, Discovering What You Were Born to Do. I wrote this a number of years ago. It was one of the top business books of the year. It was published, got a lot of acclaim, and it really helps people discover what they were put on the earth to accomplish, what they were put here to do. And if you want to apply some of these principles about being known for something, what is it? How do we figure out what I was put on the earth to accomplish? This is the book for you. One Big Thing, Discovering What You Were Born to Do. You can get it at Barnes & Noble. You can get it on Amazon. Wherever you get books, you can get it. It's easy to find. And I would encourage you to go get a copy because this will completely transform the way you look at yourself, how you present yourself, what you personally want to be known for, and it could really impact your career in a positive way. So, One Big Thing, Discovering What You Were Born to Do. And as always, go check out my website, and I would encourage you, get my newsletter, subscribe to my newsletter. If you go to the upper right side of upper corner of my homepage at philcooke.com, it lets you sign up for my newsletter, and it's just a one email a week, free of just the top blog post of that week. And it saves you having to go check and look at my website all the time. We'll just send it right to you. And it's a great way for you to stay informed about these kind of topics that I'm talking about and writing about all the time. Thank you so much.